My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 33, and last month my grandmother's house became mine on paper. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm mug of coffee, the will packet open beside a grocery receipt, and a flickering overhead light. Outside, a car door shut, then another, and the quiet felt rehearsed. When my mother's name lit up my phone, her voice sounded strangely sweet, like she was calling about Sunday dinner. That's when something shifted, and I realized I'd never been part of the plan. Ever. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever felt betrayed or pressured by your own family, hit like and subscribe. You're not alone in this. And this story might feel uncomfortably familiar. I grew up believing that being the oldest meant something. Responsibility, maybe a little extra trust. In our house, it meant learning how to stay quiet early. Our kitchen was long and narrow, always smelling faintly of coffee and toast, the radio murmuring morning news while my mother moved between the counter and the stove. Denise had a way of filling a room without looking at you. She'd talk, laugh, complain about errands, all while her eyes stayed fixed on Brianna. At dinner, she served my sister first. It wasn't dramatic, just a habit. Brianna's plate slid across the table while mine waited a second longer. Greg would already be asking Brianna about her day. How was school? Sweetheart. Did your teacher say anything about your presentation by the time the spoon reached me? The conversation had moved on. I learned to eat quietly, to nod when spoken to keep my answers short so I didn't interrupt whatever praise was unfolding beside me. When I was 12, I came home waving a permission slip for the debate team. It was $150. Not nothing, but not impossible. I remember standing by the fridge, the hum of it vibrating through my back, while I explained why it mattered. My father barely looked up from his phone. We need to prioritize. Lauren, that was his favorite word, prioritize. 2 days later, a new phone appeared on the counter. Brianna squealed when she saw it, wrapping her arms around my mother. I stood there pretending the fridge was more interesting than my own reflection in its stainless steel door. I swallowed it, but it was deeper than I thought. School came easily to me. Straight A's, honor roll, certificates that felt heavier than they looked. I laid one of them in front of Greg once, smoothing the paper like it might create my chances. He glanced at it, nodded, then asked if I'd seen Brianna's latest art project. It was being displayed in the hallway. That night, we talked about her creativity for 20 minutes. My certificate stayed on the table, untouched, until I slid it into my backpack and took it upstairs. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. Holidays were worse. Christmas morning meant wrapping paper everywhere. Pine needles on the rug, the smell of cinnamon rolls. Brianna's gifts were always bigger, flashier, clothes with tags still on, gadgets that needed charging. Mine were practical, sweaters, a planner, once, a set of measuring cups. Denise smiled proudly and said, "You're so easy. Lauren, you never want much." I laughed long because that's what you do when you realize wanting is a liability. Grandma Rose lived in a small craftsman house a few towns over. The first thing you noticed was the garden. Even in winter, something green pushed through the soil. Inside, her house smelled like soap and apples. She had a reading room with a bay window and a worn armchair where the fabric had thinned. On Sundays, I'd sit across from her at the little table and we'd play chess. She moved slowly, deliberately. When I rushed, she tapped the board. "Don't show your next move," she'd say. "Let them think you're still deciding." One night, after my parents skipped my induction ceremony to attend Brianna's recital, I asked her why it always felt like I was standing behind glass. She pulled me close, her perfume soft and familiar. They don't love her more. Lauren, they love the image more. And she fits it. You remind them of the parts they don't want to see. I nodded into her shoulder, not trusting my voice. I filed those words away without realizing I'd need them. College meant leaving, but not escaping. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, counting tips in my car before driving home so I wouldn't feel the numbers slip through me. Brianna changed majors twice. Then again, my parents paid. When I passed my CPA exam, Grandma Rose brought lasagna and a cheap frame for my first business card. We ate in her kitchen, the oven ticking as it cooled. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. On my 25th birthday, the phone stayed silent. No call, no text. Around noon, I saw my mother's post online. Shopping day with my baby girl. Champagne glasses clinked in the photo. I stared at it longer than I should have, then closed the app and went back to work. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was used to it. But something lodged in my chest that day and never quite left. When Grandma Rose got sick, I visited every Sunday. We talked about small things, the weather, the garden. Once, she said, "Someday, you'll have to choose yourself." I thought she meant moving, or a job. I never imagined she meant what came next. When Grandma Rose passed, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the counter where she used to rest her hand. The reading room still smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. I sat in her armchair and stared out the bay window at the street, the same view she'd watched for decades. I thought I'd lost the only place where I was fully seen. The will reading happened 2 weeks later in a small office, with beige walls and a humming air conditioner. Paige Whitmore adjusted her glasses and read carefully, each word precise. When she said my name, it took a second to register. Sole beneficiary of the Caldwell house. The sentence hung in the air. Denise inhaled sharply. Greg's jaw tightened. Brianna blinked like she hadn't heard correctly. I felt something warm and frightening bloom in my chest, not joy, relief, and a quiet dread that told me this wouldn't end here. The call started that evening. My mother's voice was soft, almost tender. "Honey, we just want to talk." That house is a lot of responsibility. She spoke like she was worried about me, like she'd been worried all along. Greg followed with practicality. You could sell it, split the money. "That's what families do," Brianna cried later, her words tumbling out between sobs about how unfair the market was, how she and her boyfriend needed a place to start their life. I listened, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the water stain on my apartment ceiling. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to think. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. The text came faster after that. Early mornings, late nights, phrases repeated like they were copied and pasted. "Don't be selfish. Family comes first." Grandma would have wanted this. Each message felt like a small push, testing how far they could lean without me breaking. I went to work, balanced spreadsheets, answered emails, and felt the pressure building under my ribs. At night, I sat on my narrow couch and imagined the Caldwell house, the garden, the quiet, the possibility of not moving every year because rent went up again. At work, I ran into Ethan Park in the lobby one morning. We hadn't spoken in years, not since late nights in the library and cheap coffee during finals. He smiled, surprised. "Lauren." We caught up in polite sentences. Jobs. Time is passing. As we parted, he mentioned his company was looking at residential properties for short-term creative space. I nodded, not thinking much of it. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. The family intervention happened on a Saturday. Aunt Marlene's voice sounded rehearsed, concern wrapped in judgment. Cousin Tyler chimed in, talking about unity and fairness. It felt like listening to a script I'd heard before. When I hung up, my phone buzzed again. Greg this time. "Either you agree to sell and split the proceeds, or you're no longer welcome in this family." My hands shook as I read it. Disown. Such a clean word for something that had always felt implied. I drove to Grandma's house that afternoon without telling anyone. The key turned easily in the lock. Inside, dust motes floated in the sunlight. I stood in the reading room and thought about chess. about waiting, about not showing your next move. My phone buzzed. An email from Paige Whitmore reminding me of my rights, of the clarity of the will, of the protections Grandma Rose had insisted on. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and breathed until the shaking stopped. That night, another message came through. Unknown number. "Hi, Lauren. This is Ethan Park. I heard you might be considering selling the Caldwell house. I'm interested. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Outside, rain tapped against the window. I thought about Denise's Facebook smile, Greg's ultimatum, Brianna's tears, and Grandma's voice, steady and sure, telling me to choose myself. I typed back 2 words. Let's talk. The next 2 weeks felt like being slowly tightened inside a vice. Every day started the same. My phone buzzing before sunrise. Denise's name lighting up the screen like a warning. Her messages were syrupy at first. "Just checking on you. Honey. Hope you slept well." Then the hook slid in. "We've been talking as a family. We think selling is the responsible choice." By noon, Greg would follow with something sharper. "Have you thought about our suggestion? This is getting uncomfortable." By midnight, Brianna would call, crying, her voice cracking in all the familiar places. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me. Lauren, what did I ever do to you? I kept going to work, kept answering emails, kept pretending my chest didn't feel permanently tight. In the break room, the coffee machine hissed and sputtered, and the smell of burnt beans clung to my clothes. I'd stir my cup and feel my hand shaking, then still it against the counter. I reminded myself that numbers made sense, contracts made sense. Feelings were slippery. My parents had taught me that much without meaning to. Denise escalated when sweetness stopped working. She called while I was driving home one night, her voice suddenly cold. "Do you know what people will think she didn't wait for an answer? A daughter who hoards her grandmother's house while her sister struggles. That's the story you're writing." I pictured her typing, crafting posts, lining up sympathy. I imagined my name under a photo captioned with heartbreak emojis. The idea made my stomach drop. I didn't respond. Silence was the only thing I had left. Greg tried a different angle. Authority. He showed up unannounced at my apartment building one evening, standing in the parking lot with his arms crossed like he used to when I was a teenager. "You're being stubborn," he said, as if we were arguing about curfew. "You don't need that house. What do you even want with it?" The question landed harder than he knew. I wanted to tell him about the garden, the reading room, the way my shoulders dropped the moment I walked inside. Instead, I said, "It's mine." He scoffed. "That word doesn't mean what you think it means in this family." I watched him drive away and felt something inside me go very still. Brianna's calls turned frantic. She talked about her promotion, about how appearances mattered now, about clients and dinners, and how embarrassing it would be to admit she couldn't afford a house. I listened, picturing her luxury apartment my parents paid for, the new furniture she'd shown off online. When I pointed that out once, gently, she snapped, "So now you're judging me? I thought you were the practical one, the strong one." The words stung because they were familiar. I'd been strong for so long they'd mistaken it for consent. The family intervention followed like clockwork. Aunt Marlene called first, sighing heavily before speaking. "We're worried about you. This isn't like you." Cousin Tyler chimed in later with a text about unity and compromise. The phrases were identical, as if they'd been rehearsed in my mother's kitchen. I realized then that this wasn't a concern, it was coordination. The realization made my skin prickle. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. Paige Whitmore called midweek, her voice calm, professional. "I wanted to make sure you're okay," she said, "and to remind you that the will is very clear. Your grandmother anticipated pressure." She used words like anticipated and protected, and something in my chest loosened. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at my screensaver, a bland corporate landscape, and felt gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. The ultimatum came on a Thursday evening. A text from Greg, short and unmistakable. Either you agree to sell the house and split the proceeds, or you're no longer welcome in this family. I read it 3 times. Disown. The word echoed. I thought about all the times I'd been left out, overlooked, forgotten, about how welcome I'd actually ever been. I set my phone down and didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet clarity settle over me. That night, I called Paige back and asked what the next steps would be if my parents tried to force the issue. She explained options, timelines, consequences. Her voice was steady, grounding. When we finished, I sat in the dark of my apartment, listening to the hum of traffic outside, and made a decision that felt less like anger and more like relief. The next morning, Denise texted again. We've scheduled a meeting with the attorney. We're bringing a realtor. It's time to be reasonable. I stared at the message, then at the email from Ethan sitting unread in my inbox, confirming a time to talk. My fingers hovered over the screen. I thought about Grandma's chessboard, about not showing your next move. I typed a single word to my mother. Okay. The meeting at Paige Whitmore's office felt staged before it even began. The mahogany table gleamed under fluorescent lights, reflecting faces that had already decided the outcome. Denise sat upright, hands folded, her expression carefully concerned. Greg leaned back in his chair like a judge waiting to pass a sentence. Brianna positioned herself between them. Tissues already in hand. Kendra Blake, the realtor, wore a red blazer and a confident smile. Folders stacked neatly in front of her. They'd come prepared. They always did. Paige cleared her throat and began, but Greg interrupted almost immediately. We're here to resolve this today. He gestured to Kendra. She has buyers ready. Cash offers. No delays. Denise nodded, adding softly, we just want what's fair. Brianna sniffed on cue. I hate that it's come to this, she said, eyes flicking toward me. But I need a place to build my life. You already have somewhere to live. I thought of my studio apartment, the leaky faucet, the mold I'd reported twice. I said nothing. Paige reminded them the will was clear. Kendra slid papers across the table anyway. If we list today, the house will be gone in a week. It's a hot market. Greg leaned forward, his voice low. You will sign today, Lauren. Or we'll contest the will. Undue influence. Mental capacity. We've talked to lawyers. Denise reached for Brianna's hand. We didn't want to do this, she said, like an apology that blamed me. I watched their faces as they spoke, noticing small things I'd learned to read over years. The way Denise's jaw tightened when she felt challenged. The way Greg's eyes narrowed when he thought he was losing control. Brianna's tears dried too quickly. I felt oddly calm. Grandma's voice echoed in my head. Don't show your next move. I stood. Actually, I said, there's something we should do first. Greg frowned. Sit down. I shook my head. If we're making decisions about the house, we should be there. See it. Kendra hesitated, then smiled. That makes sense. Denise grabbed her purse. Fine. Let's go. Paige looked at me, questioning. I met her gaze and nodded once. Trust me. The drive to Caldwell House felt surreal. I went alone, my parents' car following behind, Kendra and Paige bringing up the rear. My phone buzzed at a stoplight. Ethan contract is signed, deed recorded yesterday. Let me know when you arrive. My hands were steady as I typed back. On my way. When we turned onto the street, my breath caught. The house looked the same. Porch railings freshly painted, the garden neatly trimmed. And in the driveway, unmistakable, was Ethan's car. Brianna gasped loudly. That's my CEO's car. Denise squinted. What is that doing here? Greg's face reddened. I parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes. We walked up the path together. Greg pushed past me, anger propelling him. This is ridiculous, he said, reaching for the door. It opened before he knocked. Ethan stood there, relaxed, dressed casually but impeccably. Lauren, he said, smiling. Right on time. The silence that followed felt heavy and satisfying. Brianna's mouth opened, then closed. Denise's confidence evaporated. Greg sputtered, "What is this?" Ethan glanced at them, then back at me. "I'm glad everyone's here. Makes things easier." Denise found her voice. "Are you the buyer?" Kendra stepped forward. "Mr. Park, I'm Rebecca Blake. I'm the owner," Ethan said smoothly. "The sale closed 3 days ago." Paige spoke then, pulling documents from her briefcase. "The transfer is complete. Clean title. Above market value." Greg's face twisted. "You can't do this," Denise shrieked. "We're her family." Ethan's tone remained even. Lauren exercised her legal right. Brianna's voice broke. "You sold it. To him, I met her eyes." "I sold my house," Ethan continued. "Matter of fact, the property will serve as a short-term creative space for my team, including marketing, including you." Brianna. Her knees buckled slightly. No, Ethan went on. "And Lauren will be residing here under a 10-year lease. Below market. She also holds the right of first refusal should I ever sell." Paige nodded, confirming. Denise stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Greg stepped closer, his voice a hiss. "You're done. You're out of this family." I felt the words land, then slide off. I looked past them at the house, at the porch where Grandma used to wave, at the garden she'd loved. I met Greg's gaze calmly. "If that's the price of keeping what's mine," I said, "I can afford it." The moment stretched longer than it should have, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves against the porch rail, Brianna's uneven breathing as she tried to understand what had just happened. I stood there, keys heavy in my pocket, feeling the house behind me, like a steady presence at my back. Denise was the first to break. "You planned this," she said, her voice rising, sharp and thin. "This is cruelty. Lauren, using strangers to humiliate your own family." Greg stepped forward, chest puffed, the old authority in his posture. "This isn't over. We'll sue. We'll contest everything. You manipulated an old woman. You manipulated her against us." Ethan didn't flinch. He folded his arms loosely, blocking the doorway without looking like he was trying. "The sale is legal. The funds cleared. The deed is recorded. If you have questions, your attorney can speak with Paige." Paige Whitmore nodded once, calm as ever, documents already in hand. "Your mother anticipated this response," she said evenly. "She asked me to prepare for it." Denise turned on Paige, eyes blazing. "You're supposed to be neutral." Paige met her stare without blinking. "I am? Neutral doesn't mean silent when the law is clear." She turned to me then, softer. "Lauren, would you like me to read the clause I swallowed?" "Yes." Paige opened the folder and read aloud, her voice steady against the rising tension. "Language about sole ownership, about no family override, about protections against harassment and coercion." She paused, then added, "Your grandmother also left a personal letter. She asked that I give it to Lauren when pressure began." She reached into her bag and handed me an envelope, cream-colored, my name written in Grandma Rose's careful hand. I haven't opened it yet. Just holding it felt like being anchored. Brianna let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "This is insane. You're actually going to make me work here in her house?" She gestured wildly at the porch, the windows at me. Ethan answered before I could. "This is a business decision. The location suits our needs. If you feel unable to maintain professional boundaries, HR can discuss your options." Her face was drained of color. "Options." The word hung there, heavy with implication. Denise grabbed her arm. "You can't do this to her. She's fragile." Greg nodded fiercely. "She needs support. She needs stability." I laughed then. It surprised me as much as anyone. The sound came out dry, almost brittle. "Fragile," I repeated. "She's had support her entire life, paid apartments, bailouts, second chances." I gestured toward the house. "I had this, and you tried to take it." Greg's eyes darkened. You always exaggerate. You were fine. You never needed anything. The words landed like a familiar bruise. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze. I was fine because I had no choice. I learned to be quiet because no one was listening. That's not strength, that's survival. Neighbors had begun to gather at the edge of the sidewalk, drawn by raised voices and unfamiliar cars. Mrs. Alvarez stood with her arms crossed, watching intently. Mr. Jenkins leaned on his fence, phone in hand, not hiding his interest. Denise noticed and faltered. Her voice dropped, suddenly careful. Let's talk about this inside. Privately. Ethan shook his head. This is my property. And you are guests who are becoming disruptive. Paige stepped forward, her tone firm. If this continues, you may be asked to leave. Denise stared at her, then at me. Something like panic flickering behind her eyes. You're really choosing this, she asked. A house over your own family? I looked at the envelope in my hand, then at the porch steps worn smooth by years of Grandma's footsteps. I'm choosing myself, I said. For the first time. The movers arrived then, a truck pulling up with a soft hiss of brakes. Two men hopped out, chatting easily, and began unloading boxes marked office. The normalcy of it was jarring. Life continues, indifferent to our drama. Brianna made a small, broken sound. This can't be happening. Ethan checked his watch. The team meeting is Monday. 9 sharp. He looked at Brianna. I expect professionalism. He turned to Denise and Greg. I'm going to ask you to leave now. Greg's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. He spat. Denise's eyes filled. Tears finally real or convincingly so. You've destroyed this family. I held her gaze. Steady. No. I stopped letting you do that. They left in a flurry of muttered threats and slammed doors. Brianna stumbling after them, shoulders shaking. The street slowly emptied. The movers continued their work. Paige exhaled, a small smile tugging at her mouth. You handled that well. When it was quiet again, I opened the envelope. Grandma's handwriting wavered slightly, but was unmistakable. My dearest Lauren, it began. If you're reading this, it means they tried to take what was yours. I'm sorry you had to face that. But I knew you could. Remember what I taught you. Patience, paperwork, and never apologize for protecting your future. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into my pocket. The sun dipped lower. Casting the garden in warm light, Ethan met my eyes. A question there. I nodded. Thank you, I said. He smiled faintly. You did the hard part. As I stepped inside the house, the door closing softly behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not vengeance. Just solid ground under my feet. And the quiet certainty that this chapter, at least, was mine. The house settled into a new kind of quiet after they left. Not the heavy, waiting silence from before, but something looser, like a long breath finally released. I walked through the room slowly, listening to my footsteps echo where Grandma's once had, downstairs. The movers finished arranging desks and chairs, their voices low and professional. Upstairs, my boxes waited, still taped shut, patient. That evening, my phone lit up with Denise's name again. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, a Facebook notification popped up. A photo of her and Greg from years ago, smiling too hard, captioned with something vague about heartbreak and ungrateful children. The comments came fast. Sympathy, confusion, a few careful questions. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Alvarez commented, Eleanor loved that house. She wanted Lauren there. The thread went quiet after that. Brianna didn't call. Instead, she texted once. Late. This isn't over. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. She was right, but not in the way she meant. Paige checked in the next day, confirming everything was finalized, reminding me to document any further contact. Ethan sent a brief message about Monday's schedule. Professional and contained. At work, Vivian Cho emailed to say she'd be visiting the new space soon. The tone was neutral, but there was an undercurrent there, something evaluative. Brianna's world was narrowing, and she could feel it. That night, I unpacked in the reading room, leaving Grandma's chair where it was. I opened her letter again, reading the lines I'd skimmed before. At the bottom, a sentence I hadn't noticed the first time. Sometimes the only way to stop them is to let them show everyone who they are. I closed my eyes, the meaning settling slowly. I knew what was coming next. More messages, more pressure. Maybe legal threats that would go nowhere. Maybe apologies that weren't apologies at all. I also knew what I had now. Time, space, contracts that didn't bend under guilt. As I turned off the light and went upstairs, I thought about chess, about waiting, about letting someone walk into the consequences of their own moves. They believed they'd lost a house. They didn't realize they'd handed me something far more powerful, and I wasn't done using it yet. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like the one expected to stay quiet while everyone else took more than their share, I hope this story reaches you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you think I went too far, or not far enough. And if you're still fighting that battle yourself, hit like and subscribe. This story isn't over, and neither is yours.